Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation of Dua Iftitah. We're now moving on to the next part of our program. These 10 nights, we've invited speakers from a range of different countries to speak to us about the plight of Muslims in those countries. And today, we're very fortunate to have Rimsara Alouane, who will be speaking to us about France and Muslims in France, a topic that has become more important in the recent months. Rimsara is a French legal academic and commentator. She's a Ph.D. candidate in comparative law at the University Toulouse-Capitole in France. Her research focuses on religious freedom, civil liberties, constitutional law, and human rights in France, Europe, and North America. Her work has been published by leading outlets including the Atlantic Council, Brookings Institution, and Foreign Policy. And we're very fortunate to also have her speak later this year in a more detailed fashion where we can have Q&A. But for a short talk here in Ramadan, let's start with Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak. First of all, I hope and pray you are all doing well, you are healthy, and Ramadan is going smoothly, even though I know too well how difficult the situation is with COVID. And I hope things will get better very, very soon. We have a vaccine, which in itself is a huge miracle. And let's hope and pray for the best. Second, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank Miqdad Versi for his kind invitation and for trusting me to address you tonight and to talk about this very difficult conversation and this quite tough topic, which is the situation of French Muslims in France. I will try in this very short time, I will try first of all to contextualize the debate and to give you some insights to explain. I will try to explain you some key concepts that will allow you maybe to understand how complex the situation is, because I know, for example, that sometimes it's very difficult to understand the situation in France, partly because there is a language barrier. If you don't read or understand French, it's very hard to follow the debate. But also I know that there are political forces out there who are instrumentalizing this issue for their own political agenda. I think it's wrong. I think it doesn't help anyone, and it's wrong. So I will try to do that, try to explain you what the deal with laïcité, a concept that is misunderstood both abroad but also in France, and explain you what is at stake here, especially with anti-Muslim bigotry or the legislation successive administrations have been trying to pass or passed. What are the consequences? And finally, what can we do to support French Muslims and to find solution to make the situation better? Because the idea is not to go after France for the sake of going after France. It's to call out for accountability and also to fight for human rights as a whole, for civil liberties. Because I don't think it's just Muslims here at some point. You know, when you start targeting a group, be sure that another group would be the next one being targeted. And I think it's wrong. So let's start maybe with history. France is one of the most diverse countries in Europe. And France is also the country with one of the highest Muslim population. I don't know if you know this, but statistics based on ethnicity and religion are prohibited under French law, which makes it very difficult to have a accurate number, but we estimate that the Muslim population here is around 7 or 8 million people, knowing that we are a population of 67 million French people in this country, both in mainland and overseas territory France. So yeah, about 7-8 millions of French Muslims. The presence of Muslims is mainly due to our colonial legacy. France, like the UK, was a colonial power. And after decolonization, we had immigrants coming to France because we needed, labor forces to build France. And those immigrants had babies, and those babies become French. And that's basically when things get complicated, and how we basically didn't expect these people from staying. And this is when things are getting complicated, in the sense that the main issue, I think, today is what does it mean to be French when you are Muslim, born and raised here, from immigrant background. So for me, it goes beyond a religious crisis. I think that France is currently facing an identity crisis. So contrary to the UK, for example, where you recognize multiculturalism, where you recognize, minorities, we don't in France. So in France, there is one people, the French people. We don't recognize multiculturalism, even though France, like I said, is a multicultural country, is a very ethnically diverse country due to our history, like I mentioned previously. And which means that we are what we call a universal country. We do not recognize race, and we don't recognize particularities, like, in the Anglo-American world, which in theory is great, meaning that we don't see you because you're black, white, or Muslim, or Jewish, or Christian, etc., etc. We recognize you and protect you because you are human. It's great in theory, but in practice, it's not that easily implemented. And unfortunately, we are a country that faces a lot of racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, and usually, I always say that France is a country in denial. Because we say we don't recognize race, it allows us to close our eyes on the real issues and how racism is actually really, really real. And I don't think there is a political will to face it, which I think is problematic, but that's another debate for another time. When it comes to the protection of religious freedom, again, we are very different from the UK. So in France, we have a type of secularism that we call laïcité. What does it mean? Laïcité can be dated back to the revolution. And the idea really was to remove the Catholic Church influence from public affairs. It was not until 1882, with the Great Laws on Public Education, that the concept of laïcité became really put into law. With a great law on education, the minister at that time, Jules Ferry, the idea really was to remove religious influence, the Catholic Church, from public schools. So this means that, for example, instead of having religious classes, it was replaced with civic classes. And when you move fast forward to 1905, a very, very important law was adopted, the law of 1905, of the 9th of December of 1905 on separation of churches and state, where actually the word laïcité does not even appear, But this law is crucial. This law put into place separation of churches and state, meaning that the state does not interfere with public affairs and vice versa. And for that, neutrality is imposed upon the state, and the state only. Not on private individuals, because this neutrality allows the state to protect freedom of conscience, freedom to believe, to not believe, to change religion, etc., as well as freedom of religion. And in this country, freedom is not unlimited. Freedom of religion, freedom of conscience are protected as long as public order is not disturbed. It's quite clear. So, for example, a civil servant is not allowed to wear any religious signs. So a Christian civil servant cannot wear a big cross. A Jewish civil servant cannot wear a kippah. A Muslim civil servant cannot wear a hijab. Why? Because they are the state. They work for the state. And on the other hand, private individuals don't remain neutral. They can dress the way they want in the public square. It is really this idea to find a balance to be able to manage state and religion relations. And that's pretty much it for laicity. Now, the problem is laicity since 1989, so since the beginning of the 90s really, has been weaponized by politicians, both from the right wing and the far right, but also from a certain part of the left. Laicity was used and transformed into a tool to target religious freedom, and especially to target Muslim visibility. And usually, most of the time, it will affect Muslim women because they are the most visible. So it all started with the headscarf affair in the 90s, which led to, so this affair really quickly was about a bunch of female students in a school in the suburbs of Paris who were expelled because they were wearing a hijab. And this opened a debate on the wearing of religious signs in public school, which led to the adoption of the law 2004 on the prohibition of ostentatious religious signs in public school. So since 2004, students from primary to high school are not allowed to wear ostentatious signs. All types of signs are targeted, but of course the intent of the legislation, the intention behind this piece of legislation was really to target the hijab. And ever since, there is not a single year where the French government, and again, both from the right and the left, tried to target the visibility of Muslims. It was the case with the law of 2010 on the prohibition of the full face covering. It was the case of the different local bans on the burkini, which eventually where eventually the Council of State rejected those bans, saying that they were violating religious freedom and civil liberties as well. And more recently, the law on so-called separatism, which really is a law that would have a huge impact on the organization of Islam in France. And really, the problem in this country is that in the end, we do not implement laicite. We do not respect this idea that the state should not interfere with religious affairs. And in France, Islam has always been and continues to be perceived as a religion that needs to be tamed, as a religion that needs to be control, because Islam is perceived as a danger. And to be honest, I don't think it's just in France. There are similar kind of behaviors across Europe, but things always, most of the time, start with France because of the history we have with Muslims, and especially because of what our colonial past. And there is also an issue on the Muslim side. We have a problem of organization, clearly, which maybe is actually a very French issue. So contrary to the UK, again, the organization of Muslims is not that advanced in this country. And there are a lot of internal wars in between organization, mainly due to who will keep power, who will have the monopoly on power, who will control Islam and Muslims. And the Muslim communities, Muslim organizations are quite balkanized. And my take on this is that two things. First, I believe that we need more than ever to go back to the spirit of the law of 1905 on protecting religious freedom, on protecting freedom of conscience, and on finally separating efficiently state and church. The state has absolutely no business in dealing with religious affairs. It can empower religions to be able to express themselves freely in a way that is not at odds with French laws. But it is also the role of Muslims to organize themselves, and if they don't want someone else to take care of their affairs. And that's something we have an issue with. And I'm not even mentioning here foreign interference, who are trying also to have a say on the organization of Islam. And finally, what can be done to support Muslims? I would say listen to French Muslims. Listen to what they have to say. It's easy to believe influencers who want to use the situation in France to become famous. And I have seen that on Twitter, I have seen that on Facebook, and even on Instagram for some reasons. Listen to them. Reach out to them. If there is an interview, don't jump on it for the sake of commenting. Try to find people who actually are capable of dealing with this topic. It's very important to have representation, to have access to insiders, to people who know the situation on the grounds. Of course, bring women. When it comes to the topic on the hijab, of course, usually women are always, or at least most of the time, never invited to the debate, whether it's by the state, who are trying to legislate on how they are supposed to dress, or even Muslim communities who are going to discuss the hijab without even bringing a woman wearing one, or Muslim woman able to comment on it. I think that's very important. And finally, I think we all need to organize, to learn from each other, and to be able to show that we belong here. It's draining to have to prove that you belong to a country that is yours. We are French, and we happen to be Muslims. Unfortunately, it will be a long way until this happens. I believe that things will get worse before they get better. But when there is a will, there is a way. It's still a long road, but if we do our best to organize, help each other, and try really to pressure the government to finally consider Muslims as their own, I think it will be the beginning of something new. But again, we will need patience, sabr, and let's keep being hopeful, inshallah, that the situation will get better. And don't forget that when you fight for the right of Muslims to practice their religion, it's laudable, it has to be done, but don't forget to also think of other communities, because first they go after Muslims, and then they will do after another group. And I think that gathering forces, to fight for human rights and civil liberties is a necessity. So I hope it was helpful. I have a lot of things to say, but unfortunately no time. And don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any question. Thank you so much again. Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Mubarak.